The storm came without warning. Waya had just finished gathering the last of the firewood when the sky darkened, thick clouds rolling in like a black tide. The winds howled over the land, bending the tall grasses of the prairie into a sea of waves. His children had scattered to the corners of their small homestead, seeking shelter from the oncoming fury. He could feel the pressure in the air, the kind that came before something terrible, as if nature itself was about to explode. Father Koa, his eldest son, called out from the doorway, his voice strained with urgency. Waya turned, his face set in grim determination. He knew what this meant. The storm wasn't just a passing summer squall. This was something worse, the kind of storm that could tear a man's home apart if he wasn't quick enough. The wind screamed like a banshee, the trees in the distance swaying dangerously as if they might snap in half. "Gather the children," Waya shouted, his voice lost in the roar of the wind, "and make sure the cattle are in the barn." Koa nodded, his face pale, and ran back toward the children, disappearing into the swirling dust and wind. Waya stood there, eyes fixed on the horizon. The prairie was a beautiful place, vast and empty, but it was also unforgiving. The winds that swept across the land were merciless, and this storm had the scent of danger. It had been a dry year, and the earth was cracked. The sky held the promise of rain, but it was a rain that might come too late. Waya had seen too many storms turn deadly, too many families swept away by nature's fury. He looked down at his hands, the rough calluses earned through years of hard labor. He wasn't afraid of the storm itself. He had seen worse. It was the isolation that gnawed at him, the vast empty space that surrounded him, the constant struggle to keep his children fed, to keep them safe. And now the storm. The thought of his wife, who had passed nearly a year ago, cut through him like a knife. The emptiness that had followed her death never seemed to lessen. He had promised her on her deathbed that he would take care of their children, that he would keep their family together. But as the storm raged around him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was failing them. His hands were strong, but they couldn't do it all. Not anymore. He heard the sound of the children scrambling inside the door, slamming shut behind them, as Koa led them in from the fields. "Father!" "The cattle are inside," Koa said, his voice breathless. He grabbed Waya's arm. "We need to go inside now." Waya nodded, stepping into the house, his boots heavy on the dirt floor. The small cabin felt like a sanctuary, but it also felt suffocating. It was a place of memories. The bed where he had once shared warmth with his wife, the chairs where their children had played, and the hearth that had once been full of laughter. Now it was just quiet. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it, his eyes scanning the room. His 6 younger children huddled together, their faces lit by the flickering firelight. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes. Koa at 14 tried to keep up a strong front for them, but the others were too young. The girls, Sita and Isla, ages 11 and 9, clung to each other, their faces pale with worry. Reno, who was 8, looked up at him with wide eyes, his lip trembling. Toma, at just 6, had no words, only tears, as he buried his face into Isla's shoulder. And little Maiku, barely 2, sat in a small corner, not fully understanding what was happening, but sensing the fear that hung in the air. Waya walked over to them, kneeling down in front of his children. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the heat it provided felt insufficient against the coldness that had settled in his heart. "Don't be afraid," Waya said, his voice soft but firm. "The storm is just a storm. It will pass." But his words felt hollow even to himself. There was a bitterness that came with every promise he made, now one he couldn't escape, no matter how hard he tried. Koa sat down beside Waya, his brow furrowed in thought. "We'll be fine," Koa said, his voice low. We've been through worse. Waya nodded his eyes, never leaving the fire. But deep inside, a doubt lingered, gnawing at him. He had been through so much in his life, battles, losses, hardships. But this was different. The burden of raising 7 children alone, of keeping them safe and fed, was heavier than he ever imagined. Every day felt like a struggle, but the weight of it had never felt so oppressive. "What do we do if the storm gets worse?" Koa asked, his voice tight. If the winds keep rising, Waya closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. "We stay inside," he said, more to himself than to Koa. "We wait." But the truth was, he didn't know what to do. There was a sudden crash of thunder, and the sound of rain started to pour down hard against the roof. Waya stood up, his eyes flicking to the door. The storm was getting worse. He could hear the walls creaking, the wind howling through the cracks in the wooden frame. This wasn't just a storm anymore, it was a fight for survival. He felt the tension in his chest, the pulse of anxiety in his veins. And then in the midst of the chaos, he had a thought that hit him like a thunderclap. "I need help." He turned to Koa. "Go gather the firewood inside," Waya ordered. "And make sure everyone stays close. If the wind gets any stronger, we may need to move to the cellar." Koa's eyes widened, but he nodded and stood to do as his father asked. Waya watched his son go, a pang of guilt twisting in his stomach. He had never wanted his children to grow up like this, struggling always on the edge of survival. But in the back of his mind, a more troubling thought surfaced. What if this storm is just the beginning? As the storm howled outside, Waya sat by the fire, watching his children huddled together for warmth and safety. He had fought so hard to keep this family together, to hold on to the memories of his wife, to protect them from the world outside. But now, in the midst of the storm, he realized something he hadn't fully admitted to himself. He couldn't do it alone anymore. The storm raged on through the night, and Waya knew that when it passed, he would have to make a choice, one that could change the course of his life and the lives of his children. The morning after the storm, Waya sat at the wooden table in the dim light of dawn, his fingers hovering over the parchment. His heart was heavy, his mind clouded with doubt. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that felt unchanged. The prairie still stretched endlessly. The winds still howled at the edges of his consciousness, and his children still depended on him. But something had shifted inside him, a realization that had settled in the quiet moments of the night. He couldn't do this alone anymore. He had never felt the weight of responsibility more acutely. Raising 7 children, managing the land, fighting to keep their home standing amidst nature's unrelenting fury, it had all become too much. He needed help. He needed someone who could understand, someone who could see beyond the wreckage of his life and find a reason to stay. The pen felt foreign in his hand as he dipped it into the ink and began to write. He had tried before. 19 letters had been sent, 19. Women had rejected him, some with kind words, others with a simple silence that felt like a rejection deeper than any words could convey. But he couldn't stop now. He had promised his wife on her deathbed that he would protect their children, that he would keep them together. And now he was realizing that the promise needed to evolve. He wasn't asking for love. Not yet. He was asking for partnership, for someone to help shoulder the burden, someone who could bring warmth and stability back into the house, someone who could teach the children how to laugh again. Waya glanced up at the small house, the familiar walls, and the worn furniture. He thought of his wife Kohana and the days they had shared in this place. The memories flooded him like a wave of warmth and loss. Kohana had been the heartbeat of their family. When she was alive, the house had been full of her laughter, her soft touch on his shoulder, the sound of her voice calling the children. Now it was a house of silence, of emptiness, that no amount of firewood or hard work could fill. The children were still sleeping, the sounds of their breathing, the only comfort in the heavy stillness. Koa, his eldest son, had taken to looking after the younger children in the mornings. But Waya knew deep down that Koa was just a boy himself. He wasn't ready to be a man. He wasn't ready to carry the weight Waya had placed on him. Waya had tried to protect him from the harsh realities of their life. But now, as Koa entered the painful transition from boy to man, it was clear that the roles were reversing. His son was becoming the caretaker, and Waya felt the crushing weight of that responsibility. Waya began to write again, the words slow and deliberate. I am Waya from the plains of the Nez Perce. I have 6 children, all of them are young. The land is barren, but we have survived. I seek a woman who understands that a home is not just made of walls, but of the love and warmth that holds it together. We need someone who can guide the children, who can bring joy back into this house. We offer protection, shelter, and the chance to build something new together. He paused, his mind racing. Was this enough? Was he asking too much? He didn't know what the right words were anymore. All he knew was that he couldn't continue like this. I do not seek a replacement for Kohana. He added, his hand trembling slightly as he wrote her name. But someone who can stand beside me and help heal what is broken. As he finished the letter, Waya felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He folded the letter carefully, pressing it into the envelope with the same deliberate care that he'd always taken with everything. He was just about to stand up when he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. He turned, and there stood Koa, his face serious as always, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. The boy had seen him write so many letters, seen the hopes rise and fall, but there was something different now. Waya could see it in his eyes, Koa knew. Another letter, Koa asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Waya nodded. Yes. It's time. Will she come? Koa asked, stepping closer, his gaze fixed on the envelope. Waya swallowed his throat tight. I don't know, son, I don't know, but I have to try. We can't go on like this. You're still just a boy, Koa. I can't ask you to carry this burden alone. Koa looked away, his jaw tightening as if he were trying to hold back tears. It was clear that he wasn't ready to hear his father's words. He didn't want to feel like he was being abandoned. But Waya knew that wasn't the truth. He had to let Koa grow up. I'll send the letter, Koa said finally, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Do you think she will come? Waya sighed deeply. I hope so. But it's not about her coming, Koa. It's about us being ready. We need to be ready to welcome whoever arrives, whether they're a stranger or someone who fits into our family. Koa nodded slowly, understanding the depth of his father's words, even though he didn't want to. He took the letter from Waya's hand and left the room without another word, a weight in his own heart now too. As Waya watched his son walk away, he felt a pang of guilt. The boy wasn't ready for this, for the responsibility of keeping the family intact, of being a leader when he was still figuring out how to be a child. But it was the world they lived in, a world that left no room for innocence for long. Waya stared at the empty space where his wife once sat. He missed her, but the ache inside him was different now. It wasn't just loneliness. It was fear. Fear of losing control, fear of never being able to protect his children the way he promised. The land, the house, the storm, none of it mattered if he couldn't offer them hope, a future, a mother to balance the absence of his wife. The days passed in a haze of work and waiting. The letter had been sent. Now all he could do was wait. The storms seemed to come and go, but nothing could ease the tightness in Waya's chest, the growing realization that time was slipping away from him, that his children were growing too fast, and that the world outside was unforgiving. Late one afternoon, Waya sat with his children by the fire. The silence in the room was comforting in some ways, but it also carried a weight he could no longer ignore. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the warmth it gave could not chase away the coldness that had crept into his heart. "Koa," Waya said, his voice rough, "make sure you check the cattle tonight. The wind feels wrong." Koa nodded, but his eyes were distant. Waya knew his son had heard the same fear in his voice that he had felt. There was something ominous about the wind, something more than just the season changing. Waya knew the storms were inevitable, but the real storm was within him, a storm of doubt and fear. He needed help, and when the letter came, he would have to make a choice. Aponi sat in the dim light of her small cabin, the letter resting in her hands. She had read it twice already, the words blurring on the page as her mind raced. She had hoped for a sign, something to guide her as she navigated the difficult life of widowhood. The letter was unexpected, a lifeline thrown into the sea of her grief and loneliness. It was an invitation, a plea from a man named Waya, who had written about his 7 children and his struggle to keep their home together. Aponi's eyes flickered over the words again. She could almost feel the desperation in his handwriting, the weight of his request. He wasn't asking for love, not yet. He wasn't asking for much, only that someone help him shoulder the burden of raising his children, of bringing warmth back into a house that had seen too many storms. And she, a woman also alone, could understand that need more than most. But the decision was not an easy one. Aponi had her own children to raise, her own life to rebuild. She had already been through so much, the loss of her husband, the struggles of keeping her small homestead afloat. She had built her life again from the ground up, a life of independence and survival. Could she leave that behind? Could she open her heart to someone else's children, to a man she had never met, simply because his words had struck a chord with her? She stared out the window, her thoughts swirling. The wind was beginning to pick up outside, a gentle reminder of the ever-present forces of nature that dictated the pace of life on the plains. She knew that a decision had to be made soon. She had been living in this limbo for too long, caught between the past and the future. The question was not whether she could leave her home. She had already proven she could survive on her own. The question was whether she could open herself up to something new. Aponi sighed, folding the letter carefully before slipping it into her bag. She had never been the type to let emotion rule her decisions, but this time something was different. There was a quiet urgency in the letter, a sense that time was running out. The man had reached out, and she could feel that this might be a turning point for both of them. The day passed in a blur of routine. Aponi worked in the fields, fed her children, and kept to herself, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. She had talked to Sakima, her closest friend, about the letter. Sakima had listened patiently, her face unreadable, before offering her advice. "You can't live in the past forever," Aponi, Sakima had said, her voice gentle but firm. "You've given enough of yourself to loss. Maybe this is your chance to build something new." Sakima's words echoed in Aponi's mind as she stood outside that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was streaked with brilliant reds and purples, a reminder of the beauty that still existed in the world, despite all the pain. The wind began to pick up again, a familiar feeling that sent a shiver down Aponi's spine. The storm would come soon, she knew. It was part of life here, the storms that would break, then pass, leaving behind a world that had changed just a little. The letter had been a lifeline, but it was also a reminder that the world was bigger than her small cabin, her small life. She had spent too long trying to heal alone, And perhaps that was why she felt the pull to this stranger's request. Perhaps it was time to stop running, time to stop living in isolation. That night, after her children had gone to bed, a pony sat by the fire, the letter still folded in her lap. The decision was still there, hovering in the air like smoke. She didn't know if she could leave everything behind, even for a chance at something new. But she had to admit she was tired of being alone. In the quiet darkness, she made her decision. The next morning, she would leave for Waya's homestead. She would answer his call, and she would see what might come of it. Perhaps it was foolishness. Perhaps it was hope. But at least it was something. The next day, a pony set out with her children, the letter tucked securely in her bag. The journey to Waya's homestead was long, the landscape vast and unforgiving, just as it always had been. But there was something different now, something that made the miles seem less daunting. For the first time in months, a pony felt the stirrings of possibility. The journey took 2 days. A pony had packed what little she could carry, enough for the trip, but she had no idea what awaited her at the other end. Would Waya be kind? Would his children accept her? Would this be another broken dream, or would it be the fresh start she had been longing for? When they finally arrived, the homestead loomed in front of them, a small house at the edge of the prairie. A pony's heart pounded in her chest as she gazed at it. There were no guarantees here, only the unknown. As she stepped off the wagon, her eyes searched the small cabin for any sign of the man she had read about, the man whose words had called to her through the distance. But there was no sign of him. The wind swept across the plains, again a soft reminder that life, no matter how much we want to control it, was always a matter of chance. And then she saw him. Waya stood at the doorway of the cabin, his tall form silhouetted against the light, his face unreadable. He was watching her, waiting for her to take the first step. A pony's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. This was it. She had come this far. Now all she could do was walk forward. A pony took a step toward him, her feet feeling heavy in the dirt, but there was a quiet certainty in her movements. She had made the right decision, hadn't she? Maybe, just maybe, this is where I'm meant to be, she thought, her eyes meeting his, and for the first time in years, she felt the faintest stirrings of hope. A pony stood at the threshold of the cabin, the cool wind tugging at her hair and the hem of her dress. She had made the journey 2 long days through the unforgiving terrain, and now here she was, staring at the home she had only known through a letter, not knowing what to expect, not knowing what kind of man Waya was, or what kind of life awaited her here. The world around her was vast, and the prairie stretched endlessly in every direction. It felt so different from the life she had built on her own land. Everything here was wide and open, free, yet wild, harsh, yet strangely beautiful. She could already feel it, the pull of a new beginning. But as she crossed the threshold of the cabin and stepped into the dim interior, the reality of her decision hit her. Waya stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a shadow that filled the room. His face was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that made a pony pause for just a moment. He was waiting, his presence a silent invitation to step deeper into his world, into the life he had built here, a life full of children, sorrow, and perhaps hope. But it was not just Waya that a pony had come to face. It was the children. They were the true test of this new life she was stepping into. As she looked past Waya, she saw them, his 7 children, all gathered in the corner of the cabin, their eyes fixed on her with a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and fear. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of expectation. Waya stepped aside, his hand brushing against the doorframe. "A pony. These are my children," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with the unspoken weight of the moment. This is Koa, my eldest. He continued, nodding toward the boy who was standing closest. Koa's face was serious, his shoulders squared in a way that made him look older than his 14 years. And these are the others, Sita, Ayla, Rano, Toma, and Maiku. Each child looked up as their name was spoken, their eyes flickering to a pony, but never meeting hers directly. It was as if they were all waiting for her to do something, to say something, to give them a sign that everything was going to be okay. A pony swallowed hard, suddenly feeling the weight of their gazes. They were all so young, so full of need. The smallest Maiku was barely 2, his wide eyes taking in the unfamiliar woman standing at the door. Toma, the 6-year-old, tugged at his sister Isla's sleeve, his eyes still wide with uncertainty. The older ones, Sita and Reno, stood apart from the group, watching with a mixture of curiosity and fear. A pony took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. She had known this moment would come, but standing here facing these children, she realized just how unprepared she felt. She had no experience raising children who weren't her own. Could she do it? Could she really love them, as Waya had asked? She knelt down slowly, her eyes searching for something, anything, that would make her feel like she belonged in this strange new world. Maiku, sensing her approach, toddled over his small hand, reaching out tentatively toward her. A pony's heart clenched. She reached down gently, cupping his hand in hers, and smiled. Maiku smiled back, his small lips curling upward in a shy, hesitant grin. It was a small thing, but it was a start. A pony rose, her eyes meeting Waya's, who was watching her carefully, waiting to see what she would do next. "This is just as hard for them as it is for me," she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. "I know they don't want me here, but I don't know how to fix that." Waya nodded, stepping closer. "It's not something that can be fixed overnight. But we have to try. They've been through a lot. They miss their mother just like I do." His voice softened, the weight of his own grief clear in his eyes. A pony looked back at the children. Koa was still watching her, his expression unreadable. His eyes held so much fear, so much uncertainty. He was the oldest, and a pony could tell that he felt the responsibility of being the man of the house. It was a heavy burden for someone so young. Sitting down on the small bench near the hearth, a pony took a deep breath. "I don't know how to be a mother to you all," she said, her voice steady, but filled with vulnerability. "I don't know how to fill the hole your mother left, but I promise I will try. I will try to help you heal, to help you feel safe again." For a long moment, the room was silent. The children exchanged glances, but none of them spoke. Finally, Koa stepped forward. His gaze was still wary, but there was something in his eyes now, something that had shifted. "You're not her," Koa said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "No one can be." A pony knotted her throat tight. "I don't want to be her," she said softly. "I just want to help you if you'll let me." There was another long pause, the air heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, Sita, the 11-year-old, spoke up. "How do we know we can trust you?" Her voice was sharp, the anger that had been simmering just beneath the surface now breaking free. A pony took a deep breath, meeting Sita's gaze. "You don't have to trust me right away. Trust takes time. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. I won't give up on you." And the room was still for a moment, the tension palpable. Then Reno, the 8-year-old, spoke, his voice small but sincere. "Can you make us food?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. "I'm hungry." A pony smiled, the smallest of smiles, but it was enough. "I can do that," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "I'll make you all something to eat." Slowly, the tension began to lift. The children didn't come running to her all at once, but Maiku had taken her hand again. and Toma was now standing beside her, his small hand resting on her knee. Sita and Aila were still hesitant, but they no longer seemed as distant. Waya watched them, a look of relief crossing his face. The silence between him and Aponi was thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who had made a choice, a quiet that felt more like the beginning of something than an end. The following days were quiet, but a thick silence lingered between Aponi and Waya's children. They ate their meals together, worked side by side, but no one spoke much, least of all the children. There were no arguments or open rejection, just a careful, fragile peace. Aponi had known it would be difficult, but the weight of the silence felt heavier than anything she had expected. Every time she looked into their faces, she was reminded of the absence of their mother. Her own grief was still raw, but it was nothing compared to what these children had suffered. The more she tried to help, the more she realized that it was not enough. She could cook for them, wash their clothes, mend their wounds, but nothing she did could fill the space their mother had once occupied. She woke early each morning before the sun had fully risen and went to the barn to tend to the animals. The animals had become a kind of solace for her, a routine, a simple task she could do without the weight of expectations. When the sun rose, she would walk back to the house, her arms full of firewood or bundles of hay, and the children would be waiting as they always were. But this morning felt different. When she entered the cabin, Koa was sitting on the porch, his face hard and distant. His arms were crossed, and he seemed lost in thought. "Aponi," he said quietly, when he saw her, his voice cold. "Why did you come here?" She paused, surprised by the suddenness of the question. The others were inside, but it was just the two of them now, the space between them wide and silent, the unspoken tension palpable. "I came here to help," Aponi said, trying to keep her voice steady. "To help you and your father and your siblings." "You're not my mother," Koa spat, his voice full of anger. "You don't belong here. We don't need you." The words hit Aponi like a slap, and for a moment she could only stand there, stunned by the weight of them. Her heart seemed to stop for a second. She had known that this would be hard, but she hadn't expected it to feel so personal, so sharp. "I'm not trying to replace her," Aponi said softly, her voice faltering. "I would never try to replace your mother. I just want to help you all." Koa stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think just because you cook for us, wash our clothes, that you're helping. You can't fix what's broken. No one can. So don't act like you're doing something special." Aponi felt the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. He was right in a way. She couldn't fix it. She couldn't bring back his mother, and she couldn't erase the hurt that lingered in their hearts. But she didn't know what else to do. She had tried to offer them everything she could, and yet it never seemed enough. "I know I can't fix everything," Aponi said quietly, her voice low but steady. "But I can be here, and I can try. That's all I can offer: my presence, my care, and my willingness to be a part of this family." Koa looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he let out a sigh, his shoulders sagging. "I don't want to hate you," he said, his voice softer now, though still filled with an edge of bitterness. "I just don't know how to feel. I don't know if I can accept you." Aponi nodded, her heart aching for him. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. None of this was easy. But she wasn't going to give up, not after everything she had already put into this. "I understand," Aponi said softly. "I don't expect you to accept me right away. It will take time. But I'm not going anywhere, Koa. I'm here to stay." He didn't respond, but his gaze softened just a little before he turned and walked back inside, leaving Aponi standing alone on the porch, her heart heavy with the weight of their conversation. The days that followed were filled with more of the same quiet exchanges, reluctant cooperation, and the slow, painful process of building something new. Sita and Isla remained distant, though not as openly hostile as Koa. Reno and Toma had warmed to her, but their young age made their affection more fleeting than genuine. Maiku, the smallest, still clung to her in moments of uncertainty, his quiet presence a balm to her wounded heart. But there were moments, small fleeting moments, where Aponi felt as though they might be coming closer. Koa, though still distant, had started to help her with small tasks around the house. He didn't speak much, but his actions spoke louder than words. And though he never apologized, Aponi knew that the anger in his heart was beginning to soften. One afternoon, Reno came to her with a request. He was standing by the door, his face flushed from running his hands clutching the hem of his shirt. "Can you help me with something?" he asked, his voice hesitant. Aponi smiled at him. "Of course. What is it?" "I need help fixing my boots," he said, holding them up to her. "They're too small and they're uncomfortable." Aponi took the boots from his hands, studying them for a moment. "I think we can fix that. Let me see if I have some leather in the barn." As she worked with Reno that afternoon, stitching the boots together and making them a little more comfortable, she realized how much these small moments meant. She wasn't their mother, and she didn't pretend to be. But perhaps in time she could become something else, something they might need just as much. That evening, after dinner, Koa came to her again, this time without the sharpness in his eyes. He stood by the door, his hands in his pockets, looking unsure. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I shouldn't have said that. I don't know why I did. I miss her, Aponi, and I don't know how to stop." Aponi looked at him, the words catching in her throat. She had known this was the real battle, not the tasks or the daily routines, but the quiet ache in their hearts that couldn't be fixed with kindness alone. "I know you miss her," Aponi said softly. "We all do. But I'm here. I'm not trying to replace her. I just want to be a part of your lives, even if that means taking it one day at a time." Koa nodded, his face still uncertain, but softer than before. He didn't say anything more, but there was a small shift, a crack in the wall between them. And for the first time since she had arrived, Aponi felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope. The days passed slowly, and Aponi still felt the distance between herself and Waya's children. They had grown accustomed to her presence, but there was an unspoken hesitation that lingered. She knew it would take time, but the quiet was heavy, and the weight of it seemed to grow with each passing day. One afternoon, Waya returned from the fields earlier than usual. His face was tired, but there was something different in his eyes when he saw Aponi. They had been living in a delicate balance, she trying to prove her place in their family, and him carrying the unspoken burden of grief and responsibility. "How are you holding up?" Waya asked, sitting down beside her at the table. Aponi looked up, her hands still resting on the half-finished quilt she had been working on. "Some days are better than others," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I still don't feel like I truly belong here. Like I'm just filling a gap, you know." Waya studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You already do. You may not see it, but the children need you more than you think. I need you." His voice was steady but filled with the truth of his own struggles. Aponi's heart tightened. She knew he was right, but there were still doubts that lingered in her mind. She wasn't trying to replace Kohana, but she couldn't ignore the space that was left, the unspoken truth that she wasn't their mother. How could she bridge that gap? As the afternoon wore on, Koa approached her, a hesitant expression on his face. For the first time in a while, he seemed to be looking at her without the coldness that had characterized his gaze in the past. "Can you help me with something?" he asked quietly, his voice unsteady. Aponi nodded, her heart skipping a beat. Of course. I, I've been working on the barn. Koa began shifting uncomfortably. There's a section that needs repairing. Could you help me fix it? Aponi felt a small surge of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a step forward. They spent the rest of the afternoon working side by side, fixing the barn together in comfortable silence. She wasn't sure if Koa saw her as a mother yet, or if he ever would. But in that quiet moment, something shifted. They weren't at odds anymore. They were simply two people working together to make life easier for both of them. Later that evening, Koa came to her looking less tense than he had in days. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice sincere. "I shouldn't have said what I did the other day. I miss her. I miss my mother. I didn't know how to deal with it." Aponi smiled softly. "I understand, Koa. I miss her too. But I'm here. I'm not trying to replace her. I'm just here trying to help you all." He nodded, looking down for a moment before meeting her gaze. "I know. I'm just not used to it." "I'm not used to it either," she replied gently. "But I'm trying. And I'm not going anywhere." The days that followed seemed to blur together in a haze of work and quiet moments. Aponi had learned to navigate the rhythms of Waya's household. She had made small inroads with the children. Koa was still distant, but less hostile, and even the younger ones had started to warm to her, seeking her out for comfort when things got difficult. Yet despite these small victories, the one truth remained that could not be ignored: she was not their mother, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not fill that void. The loss of Kohana, their mother, was something Koa carried with him like a wound that wouldn't heal. It was evident in the way he interacted with her, the guarded look in his eyes, the defiant silence he sometimes threw her way, as if waiting for her to fail or leave. Aponi had hoped that over time he would soften, that the anger he held for her presence would lessen. But with each passing day, she felt the weight of his grief press harder against her own. It wasn't that Koa didn't want to accept her, it was that he couldn't. Not yet. Not when his heart was still tethered to his mother, to the life he remembered. That afternoon, Aponi was out in the garden tending to the crops when she saw Koa approaching her from a distance. His face was set in the familiar hard line, his hands shoved into the pockets of his worn jacket. A knot formed in her stomach. She knew that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. When he reached her, he stopped a few feet away, his eyes on the ground. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice tight. "About my mother." Aponi wiped her hands on her apron and nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. "Go ahead." There was a long pause before Koa finally looked up at her, his eyes full of barely contained anger. "You'll never replace her, you know." He spat, his words sharp as a knife. "No matter how much you try, you're not her. You're not even close." The words stung more than Aponi cared to admit. She had expected the harshness, but hearing it out loud, so raw and full of emotion, made the weight of his grief press down on her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but it was hard. She wasn't sure how to respond, how to bridge the vast chasm of loss that Koa was clearly drowning in. "I'm not trying to replace her," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with an ache she couldn't hide. "I would never try to replace her. I'm not your mother, Koa. I'm just someone who's here trying to help you all in any way I can." For a long moment, Koa didn't speak, and Aponi could see the struggle in his eyes, the war between the child, who had lost his mother, and the boy who was slowly growing into the man who had to face that loss every day. She knew he wasn't angry with her, not really. He was angry at the world, angry that life had been so cruel to him, angry that he had to grow up too quickly. She understood, but it didn't make the words hurt any less. Finally, Koa spoke again, his voice quieter, almost vulnerable. I don't want to hate you, Aponi, but it's hard. Every time I see you, I feel like she's being erased, like I'm being forced to forget her. I don't want you to forget her, Aponi replied, her voice breaking slightly. I want you to remember her. I want you to hold on to her memory. I can't bring her back. I can't take her place, but I'm here. And I want to help you, Koa. I want to help all of you. There was a long silence between them, but this time it wasn't as heavy. Koa didn't say anything for a while, just stood there, his hands still in his pockets. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer. I know, he muttered. I don't know how to do this. How to live with her gone. Aponi stepped forward, then closing the distance between them. She placed a hand on his arm, gently feeling the tension in his muscles. It's not easy, she said. It's never going to be easy. But we'll figure it out. Together. One day at a time. He didn't pull away, and that more than anything else told her that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a glimmer of trust starting to form between them. The following weeks passed in a mix of hard work and small moments of connection. Koa began to help more around the house, though he was still quiet and reserved. He no longer avoided Aponi, but he still wasn't ready to fully open up. Yet she could see the small changes, the way he would linger for a moment, when she spoke to him, the way he'd offer help when it was needed, even if he didn't ask for anything in return. It wasn't much, but it was progress. One evening, after a long day of work, Waya sat down beside Aponi by the fire. The children were scattered around the room, finishing their dinner, or playing quietly, the house alive with the sounds of family. For a brief moment, everything felt normal, calm even. Aponi could feel the weight of her earlier conversation with Koa lifting slightly. It wasn't the resolution she had hoped for, but it was a beginning. You're doing good with them, Waya said, his voice low but sincere. They're starting to open up to you in their own way. Aponi smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. I just wish it was faster. Some days it feels like I'm not making any real difference. You are, he said, his gaze meeting hers. It takes time. We all heal in our own time. I know, she replied softly, but sometimes it feels like I'm not getting anywhere, like I'm just spinning my wheels. Waya reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. You're not spinning your wheels, Aponi. You're here. That's what matters. It's more than enough. The air was thick with the promise of rain as Aponi stepped out of the cabin that morning. The storm had been building for hours, the sky darkening with heavy clouds that seemed to hang just above the horizon, waiting to burst. The wind was sharp, cutting through the open space of the plains, like a reminder that nature had its own pace, its own rules. It was in moments like this, when the world felt on the edge of something larger than her own concerns, that Aponi felt the weight of her place here, or the lack of it. Waya had gone to check on the herd, and the children were inside, probably still asleep. The morning had begun without fanfare, the usual stillness of the house only broken by the soft sounds of breathing from the kids. It was a quiet that had become familiar, but it was a silence that often left Aponi feeling unsure. There was no overt hostility anymore, but something lingered in the air, a kind of unspoken barrier between her and the children. She wasn't sure if it was something she was doing wrong, or if it was just the weight of their grief that kept them distant. No matter how hard she tried, no matter how many small gestures of kindness she made, the gap between them seemed as wide as ever. They were polite, but polite wasn't the same as acceptance. There was a difference between living together and belonging together. As Aponi walked to the barn to check on the animals, she caught sight of Koa, who was helping Reno with the tasks around the yard. The two boys were working side by side, but there was an unspoken distance between them. Koa was still the protector, the leader in the family, but he had begun to soften just a little. He was still distant, still holding on to the past, but the barriers were slowly starting to crack. The anger he had once thrown at her was fading, but it wasn't gone. Aponi approached cautiously, unsure of how to break the quiet. "Need any help?" she asked, her voice gentle, careful not to intrude. Koa glanced up, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he nodded, his hand wiping sweat from his brow. "We're almost done. Just need to finish the fence over there," he said, gesturing toward a part of the yard that had been neglected for some time. "I can help with that," Aponi offered, taking a step closer, offering herself without hesitation. This was what she had learned. The small acts, the everyday moments, were the ones that counted. She wasn't going to change everything overnight, but she could help where she could. For a while they worked together in silence. Koa didn't speak much, but his actions were telling. When she asked for a tool, he handed it to her without a word, his movements precise but without the harshness that had marked their earlier exchanges. He wasn't warm, not by any means, but he wasn't rejecting her either. As the wind picked up again, blowing dust and dry grass across the yard, Aponi felt a sudden pang in her chest. She knew that Koa wasn't going to come to her for comfort. Not yet, but he was trying in his own way. And that, she realized, was progress. The day wore on, and by evening the storm had finally broken, the first raindrops falling in heavy sheets. The house became a refuge from the wind and the storm outside, and the children, tired from their day, gathered in the kitchen for dinner. Aponi had been working steadily all day, preparing a stew and some bread to go with it. And as they sat down to eat, the quiet around the table felt different. The children were no longer just silently occupying space. They were eating together, their movements synchronized in a way that made her realize just how much she had grown accustomed to their presence, just as they had grown accustomed to hers. As the meal wound down, Koa looked over at her, and for the first time in a long while his eyes softened. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice almost lost beneath the noise of the storm outside. Aponi looked at him, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "What did you say?" Koa cleared his throat, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. "I said, thank you," he repeated more clearly this time. "For helping, for being here." The words were simple, but they meant everything. Aponi felt a lump form in her throat, but she managed to smile, her heart swelling with something she had been waiting to feel for so long. "You're welcome," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm here for you, Koa. All of you." There was another long silence, but this one was different. It was the kind of silence that came with understanding, not rejection. The children began to talk again, the chatter light and easy. Koa didn't say anything more, but he didn't need to. His gesture, however small, was the first true sign of acceptance she had received. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Aponi reflected on the day. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was progress. Koa had taken a step toward accepting her, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to find her place in this family. She knew the road ahead would still be hard, that there would be more challenges, more resistance from the children as they dealt with their grief. But for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. She had done what she could to make them feel safe, to help them heal. And in that quiet moment, as the storm continued to rage outside, she realized that sometimes silence wasn't a rejection. Sometimes it was just a plea for understanding. The days had become more predictable, with each one blending into the next, long hours spent working the land, tending to the animals, preparing meals, and keeping the house in order. Slowly, a pony had settled into her routine, learning the rhythms of life at Waya's homestead. But still, there remained a nagging sense of uncertainty within her. She had come to care for the children, to help them through their grief, but she still didn't feel like she truly belonged. Even as the distance between her and the children had started to shrink, she wasn't certain if they fully accepted her. Koa had softened his hostility, turning into quiet cooperation, but he still kept a part of himself closed off. The other children were much the same, polite but distant, their emotions tangled in the loss of their mother. They didn't yet see a pony as family, not in the way they had seen Kohana. And a pony wasn't sure if they ever would. That morning after breakfast, Waya had asked a pony to join him in the fields. They needed to check on the crops and prepare the soil for the next planting season. It was something they usually did together, a way for Waya to check in with her, to see how she was holding up. He had never been one for long conversations, but his silence was always a form of communication. Today, though, there was something different about his quiet demeanor. Something more urgent, as if he was trying to say something without actually saying it. As they worked side by side, their hands digging into the rich earth, a pony couldn't shake the feeling that Waya was watching her closely, as though waiting for something. She glanced up at him, the sun casting a soft glow over his weathered face. "I think it's time," he said, his voice low but steady. "Time for what?" A pony asked, her hands still working the soil in front of her. "Time for us to talk. About us. About what we're doing here." The words caught her off guard, and she stopped, glancing up at him. She had known this conversation was coming. It had always been there, lurking beneath the surface, just waiting for the right moment to rise. But she hadn't expected it now. "You know," he continued, meeting her gaze, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said when you first got here, about not being able to replace Kohana. I've seen you struggle with that. And I want you to know that I don't expect you to replace her. But I do need you here. I need you more than I thought I did." A pony felt her heart race, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. She had never truly allowed herself to believe that she had a place here, that she was truly needed. She had tried to do everything right to fill the role that needed filling, but she had always held a part of herself back, afraid of being rejected. But here in this moment, with Waya standing beside her, offering her something she hadn't allowed herself to accept, everything shifted. "I'm not sure I know how to be what you need," she admitted, her voice soft. "I've tried to help, but sometimes I feel like I'm just pretending, like I'm never going to truly be a part of this family." Waya reached out his hand, brushing hers gently. "You already are. I don't need you to be anything other than who you are, and I don't want you to feel like you have to be Kohana. You never will be. But you've brought something back into this house that we haven't had in a long time, peace. I see it in the children. They trust you in a way they haven't trusted anyone since she passed." A pony's heart swelled at his words, the walls she had built around herself slowly crumbling. She had never felt like she was enough, not for Koa, not for the children, and especially not for herself. But maybe Waya was right. Maybe she didn't have to be perfect, didn't have to fix everything. She could just be here. That was enough. "You're doing more than you know," Waya said, his voice tender. "We're a family now. Even if it doesn't always feel that way, we're in this together. And I'm grateful for that. For you." A pony nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She wanted to say something to express the gratitude she felt in that moment. But the words seemed too small, too inadequate for the feelings rushing through her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said finally, her voice firm. "I promise." Later that afternoon, as they returned to the house, Koa came up to her. His usual guarded expression softened just a little. He was holding something in his hands, a small wooden carving roughly made but with obvious care. "I made this for you," he said, his voice hesitant. "It's not much, but I thought you might like it." Aponi took the carving, her hands trembling slightly as she examined it. It was a small figure of a woman holding a child in her arms. The detail wasn't perfect, but it was clear that it had been made with care, with an effort to create something meaningful. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick. "It's beautiful." Koa didn't say anything else. He simply nodded, looking at her for a moment, before walking away. But for the first time since she had arrived, Aponi felt the distance between them close, even if just a little. That night, as they sat down to dinner, the mood in the cabin felt different. The tension that had hung in the air for so long seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quiet camaraderie. Koa and the younger children ate with less reserve, and even Reno was laughing at a joke Toma had made, the sound of their voices, a small reminder of what they were beginning to rebuild. Waya looked at Aponi across the table, a small smile playing on his lips. For a moment everything felt calm, as if they had crossed some invisible threshold, not to the end of their struggles, but to the beginning of something new, something they could build together. "You've done good, Aponi," Waya said, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "You've given them hope, and that's more than I could have asked for." Aponi met his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was waiting for permission to belong. She felt like she was already here, already part of this family, even with all the rough edges and broken pieces. The morning light crept slowly through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls, casting soft beams across the room. Aponi had been awake for hours, her thoughts swirling in the stillness of the early day. She had always woken early, the quiet of the morning, providing a moment of peace before the world outside began to stir. But today there was an unfamiliar tension in the air, a tightness in her chest that wouldn't ease. The children were still sleeping, tucked under blankets, their breaths soft and steady. Waya had already gone out to check on the cattle, leaving her alone in the quiet of the house. She had become accustomed to the solitude of these moments, the solitude that had become her constant companion since she had arrived. But today it felt different. It felt like something was shifting, like the calm before a storm. The past few weeks had brought small victories, moments of connection between Aponi and the children. Koa, though still distant, had started to let her in just a little. The others were no longer as silent around her, and Rano had even started to seek her out for advice on small matters. Yet despite the progress, there was always this lingering feeling that she wasn't truly a part of the family. It was as though she was living on the edge of something she couldn't quite grasp. As the morning stretched on, Aponi found herself at the edge of the porch, looking out across the vast prairie. The horizon seemed to stretch on forever, the land unbroken, untouched by human hands. It was beautiful in a way that made her feel both small and free. But the beauty was tainted with a sense of isolation, as if the vastness of the world was a reminder of how alone she truly was. She had tried so hard to be a part of this family. She had worked tirelessly to earn their trust, to show them that she wasn't here to replace Kohana, but to help them rebuild, to help them heal. But despite her efforts, there was still a wall between them. She couldn't break through it. She couldn't seem to bridge the gap that had been formed by grief and time. She turned and looked back toward the house. The children were beginning to stir, their quiet voices drifting toward her. Sita and Isla were laughing softly as they helped each other with their chores. Reno was running around with Toma, their voices high with excitement as they raced through the yard. But even as she watched them, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still standing outside their world. She wasn't their mother, and she would never be able to fill that role no matter how much she tried. Aponi took a deep breath and stepped back into the house, closing the door behind her. She walked slowly through the kitchen, her hands resting on the counter as she looked out the window. The weight of her thoughts felt heavier now, as if everything was pressing down on her all at once. She could hear the children moving around in the other room, their footsteps light and quick. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was still invisible to them. She was snapped from her thoughts by the sound of the door opening. Waya stepped inside, his face tired, but filled with the quiet strength that had become so familiar to her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, as he walked over to where she stood. Aponi didn't answer at first, her eyes focused on the window. There was a brief pause before she finally turned to face him. "I don't know," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "I thought I was doing everything right, but it doesn't feel like enough." Waya stood there for a moment, his eyes searching her face as if looking for the right words to say. "What do you mean?" "I'm trying, Waya. I'm trying so hard," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But no matter what I do, I still feel like I don't belong. I'm not their mother. I can't be. And maybe I'm just not cut out for this." Waya took a step forward, his eyes softening as he reached out to take her hand. "Aponi, you are exactly what they need. You're not here to replace Kohana. You're here to help them heal, to help them move forward. And I see it. Every day I see it. But I'm not enough," Aponi whispered, her voice breaking. "No matter how much I try, I feel like I'm never going to be enough for them. They're still holding on to her. They still need her." Waya squeezed her hand gently, his eyes locking onto hers. "You are enough. More than enough. The kids might not show it, but they need you. You've already done more than you think." She looked down at their joined hands, the warmth of his touch, a reminder that despite everything, she wasn't alone. But the truth was, Aponi didn't know if she could keep doing this. She didn't know how much longer she could keep trying to fill a role that wasn't meant for her. She didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending that it was enough. "I just don't know how to do this anymore," she said, her voice a mix of frustration and exhaustion. "I don't know if I can keep trying when it feels like I'm fighting a battle I can't win." Waya stepped closer, his presence a steady grounding force. "You're not fighting alone. We're in this together, Aponi. It might not feel like it now, but in time the children will see you for who you are. Not as someone who's trying to replace their mother, but as someone who's here to help them find their way forward. They may not show it yet, but they need you. And I need you." Aponi looked up at him, his words sinking deep into her heart. She had spent so much time focused on what she couldn't give, on what she couldn't do, that she had forgotten about the one thing she could offer: her presence, her commitment, her willingness to stand by them no matter what. "I'm here," she said quietly, her voice stronger now. "I'll keep trying. I'm not going anywhere." That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the silence was less heavy than usual. Koa and the younger children seemed more at ease, their laughter mingling with the sounds of conversation. Aponi could feel the shift, the way things were starting to settle into something more familiar, something more comfortable. As they ate, Waya caught her eye across the table, a small but meaningful smile on his face. For the first time in weeks, Aponi felt like maybe, just maybe, she had found her place. It wasn't easy and it wasn't perfect, but she was here. She was part of this family, and that was enough for now. It was early morning when Aponi woke, the first light of the sun creeping through the cracks in the cabin's window, casting a soft glow on the room. The day had started like any other, quiet, calm, the weight of routine settling over the homestead. But there was something different today. Something she couldn't quite place, something she could feel in the air. The house was alive with the usual sounds of morning, the soft rustling of blankets, as the children stirred the clinking of pots and pans, as a pony prepared breakfast. But this morning, it felt like a shift had occurred. The children, who had once kept their distance, now moved about the house in a more comfortable, familiar way. Koa had started to speak to her more openly, offering small snippets of conversation while they worked together. Even Sita, who had been the most distant, had begun to show signs of reaching out, a subtle softness in her gaze when their eyes met. A pony couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the change had begun, but she knew it was happening. Slowly, the walls between her and the children were crumbling piece by piece. She had earned their trust, not through grand gestures or forced affection, but through small acts of kindness, patience, and understanding. And with each passing day, they were beginning to see her not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged in their lives, someone who mattered. Later that morning, after the chores had been taken care of, a pony found herself sitting outside with Koa, who had asked her to help him with a new fence they were building near the back of the property. It was a task that required both of them, as it was heavy work, and Koa had grown tired of handling it alone. They worked together in silence, their movements synchronized as though they were beginning to understand each other without needing to speak. As they worked, Koa paused, wiping the sweat from his brow, and looked at her. His expression was no longer that of the angry, grieving boy who had first met her. There was something new in his eyes now, a quiet respect, perhaps even something like acceptance. "I don't think I ever really thanked you," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant, "for everything you've done, for being here." A pony stopped for a moment, surprised by the words. She hadn't expected him to say anything like that. In fact, she had almost given up on hearing those words from him. But here he was, standing in front of her, offering something she hadn't even realized she'd been waiting for. "You don't need to thank me," a pony said softly. "I'm just doing what I can. I'm here because I want to be." "I know," he replied, his voice softer now. "But that's the thing, you didn't have to be here. You could have left a long time ago. But you stayed. You've stayed for us. For me." There was a long pause, and a pony could feel the weight of his words settling in her chest. She wasn't sure how to respond, so she simply nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and relief. I think I'm starting to see it now," Koa said, his voice still quiet but steady. "You're not just here to help us get through the hard times. You're here to be part of our lives, to help us find a way forward. I didn't understand that at first." A pony smiled, her heart full. "That's all I've ever wanted," she said. "To help you all find a way forward. To be here with you when you need it." Koa nodded, his eyes meeting hers. There was no more anger in his gaze, no more resistance. He was finally seeing her, really seeing her as someone who had earned a place in their family. And for a pony, that realization was everything. As the day wore on, the work continued, and the conversations between them became easier, more natural. The walls that had once stood between a pony and the children were beginning to crumble, replaced by something else, something stronger. A bond. Slowly but surely, she was becoming a part of this family, not just in name but in heart. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, a pony couldn't help but notice how different things felt. The children were no longer as reserved, no longer avoiding eye contact, or speaking only when necessary. Reno was telling stories about their day, laughing with Toma as they bantered back and forth. Sita was helping Isla clean up the dishes, and Koa was engaged in a conversation with Waya, discussing plans for the coming season. The house was filled with the sounds of a family coming together, not just physically, but emotionally. For the first time, Aponi felt like she wasn't just a caretaker in their lives. She wasn't just the woman who had come to help them through their grief. She was a part of this family in the truest sense of the word. She was no longer the stranger who had arrived one fateful day. She was someone they relied on, someone they trusted. That night, as they sat around the fire, Waya looked at Aponi with a soft, approving smile. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, his voice low but full of warmth. "You've done more than I could have ever asked for." Aponi met his gaze, her heart swelling with emotion. "I'm just doing what I can," she replied, her voice thick with feeling. "But it feels like I'm finally starting to find my place here, with all of you." There was a long pause, and for a moment, everything felt still, as if time had slowed down just long enough for them to realize how far they had come. Waya didn't say anything more, but his eyes spoke volumes. He knew that Aponi had become more than just a companion. She had become a cornerstone of their family, someone who had helped them heal even when she didn't realize it. The next morning, Aponi woke to the sounds of the children already awake, their voices carrying through the house. The world outside had started to thaw from the harshness of winter, and there was a sense of renewal in the air. The land was beginning to come alive again, and so were the people within the cabin. There was still work to do, still healing to be done, but for the first time, Aponi felt like they were on the right path. She walked into the main room where the children were gathered around the table, laughing and talking together. Koa caught her eye and gave her a small, genuine smile, the kind of smile that was no longer filled with distance but with a quiet understanding. She had made it. She had become part of their lives. And now, as she looked at the faces around the table, she realized that she didn't need to try so hard anymore. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. She was already where she belonged. The sun had set, casting a warm golden glow over the homestead. The air was still carrying the scent of fresh earth and growing plants. Aponi stood on the porch, her arms crossed over her chest, as she watched the sky fade from orange to a soft purple. The world around her had changed in ways she hadn't expected, and though the journey had been difficult, there was something about this moment that felt right. The days of uncertainty and self-doubt had passed, or at least they had begun to feel like distant memories. Aponi no longer woke with that heavy ache in her chest, wondering whether she truly belonged in this family. She knew now that she did. It had taken time, it had taken patience, and most of all, it had taken vulnerability. She had allowed herself to let go of the fear that held her back, and in doing so had found a place not just in Waya and his children's lives, but in her own heart as well. She could hear the children's voices inside, their laughter spilling into the evening air. Koa, who had once been distant, now spoke to her without the coldness that had once defined their interactions. He no longer saw her as a replacement for his mother, but as someone who had always been meant to be there. The younger children who had once avoided her presence now sought her out for comfort and guidance, their small gestures a clear sign of how far they had come. Sita, who had been the most reserved, no longer kept her distance. She had become a true sister to Aponi, confiding in her, laughing with her, and even sharing her dreams for the future. It had been slow, a long and gradual process, but it had been real. As Aponi turned to go inside, she saw Waya walking toward her, his face warm in the glow of the fading sunlight. He had been busy in the fields all day, but now with the chores done, he seemed to have found a quiet moment to join her. He had become her partner in every sense of the word, not just in the work of running the homestead, but in the work of healing. He had been patient with her, never rushing her, never demanding that she fit into the role she thought she had to play. He had simply accepted her for who she was, and in doing so, had helped her become the person she needed to be. "Beautiful night," he said softly as he stepped beside her, his voice full of that quiet strength she had come to depend on. It is, she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. It feels like everything is finally falling into place. He looked at her for a moment, his eyes filled with something that she couldn't quite place, but it was warm and full of understanding. It's not perfect, he said, his voice steady, but it's enough. Aponi nodded, her gaze returning to the horizon. Enough, she repeated, as if the word had a new meaning now. In the past, she had believed that perfection was the only thing that mattered, that she needed to be flawless, to fill every role without fail. But now she understood that it wasn't perfection that made a family whole. It was the willingness to show up, to try to forgive, and to love even when things were broken. I think that's all any of us can do, she said, turning to face him. Try our best. Show up. Be here for each other. Exactly, Waya said with a smile. And we're here, all of us, together. The quiet between them felt like an understanding that had been forged in the fire of their shared experiences. It wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about forgetting Kohana or pretending she had never existed. It was about finding a way to move forward, to build something new on the foundation that had already been laid. The past would always be there, but it no longer had to define their future. Inside, the children were gathered around the table, their voices rising in a comfortable buzz of conversation. Koa looked up from the conversation he was having with Sita, his eyes meeting Aponi's across the room. There was no longer the sharpness in his gaze, no longer the resistance to her presence. There was only a quiet understanding, an acceptance that had come not because she had forced it, but because it had grown naturally, like the crops in the field that had been tended to with patience and care. Aponi knew that this moment, this feeling of belonging, wasn't a permanent fix. There would be challenges ahead, new difficulties to face. But now she was no longer afraid. The family had come to accept her, and she had come to accept them. It wasn't about replacing anything. It was about finding a new way to move forward together. As Waya stepped closer, he reached out and took her hand. There was no need for words. Everything that needed to be said had already been said through actions, through quiet gestures, through the time they had spent together. I'm proud of you, Waya said, his voice low and sincere. You've done more than you know. Aponi's heart swelled with gratitude, but she only nodded, the words stuck in her throat. She didn't need to say anything more. In that moment, she knew she had found her place, not just in the family, but in her own heart. The children were her children now. Not in the biological sense, but in the ways that truly mattered, in the ways that family was built day by day, in the small, quiet moments that came with living together. She had shown them that it was okay to move on, that it was okay to love again, even after loss. She had shown them that it was okay to be broken and still find a way to heal. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the warmth of the evening wrapping around them like a blanket, Aponi realized that she had found something far greater than she had ever imagined. She had found a home, a place where she belonged not because she had earned it, but because she had opened her heart to it. And in doing so, she had become part of a family, not one that had been perfect, but one that had been real, that had been built on the foundations of love, trust, and the willingness to try. In the end, that was enough. The wind picked up gently, moving the tall grass, and in the distance the stars began to emerge in the vast, darkening sky. For the first time in a long while, Aponi felt at peace. The future wasn't certain, and the past would always be a part of them, but they were together. That was enough for her. As she stepped inside, she took her place at the table, surrounded by the children, Waya, the family she had chosen, and who had in return chosen her. Together, they would face whatever came next, and they would do it not because they were perfect, but because they had built something that could weather the storms. And in that quiet moment, as the night settled in, a pony knew that home wasn't a place. It was the people who shared it with you, the love that held it together, and the strength to keep moving forward, even when the road ahead was uncertain. That was the family she had found, and in that she had found her peace.